All right. We're back. You know, the national media, since the passage a couple of months ago of a new rule in the Federal Register, there's a law called the Smith-Mundt Act. It was passed in 1947 that says propaganda cannot be used domestically on the American population. The reason behind that is because this was propaganda that was, promulgated during World War II. And the value of that propaganda in bending and manipulating the populace of those nations that we were using it on was apparent. It was clear. It was evident. And so a law was passed in 1947. It's called the Smith-Mundt Amendment Act. And basically it barred the use of propaganda domestically against U.S. citizens. However, new regulations have been passed 2 months ago that allow that to continue now. In fact, I did a report back on that when it happened. I did an entire program on it, and that program was quite successful. In fact, it made the it made the front page of WorldNet Daily, WND.com, in which they actually wrote that article and put that story up. But more importantly, they also incorporated the entire video stream right into the heart of the story. Joe Kovacs from WND wrote that. And the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012 repealed the prohibition. John Hudson of the Foreign Policy magazine, says, for decades, a so-called anti-propaganda law prevented the United States government's mammoth broadcasting arm from delivering programming to American audiences. But on July 2nd, that of this year, that came silently to an end with the implementation of a new reform passed in January. The result is an unleashing of thousands of hours per week of government-funded radio and TV programs for domestic U.S. consumption in a reform initially criticized as a green light for U.S. domestic propaganda efforts. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, there's a report out on CBS in their D.C. bureau, which is CBS stands for Communist Broadcasting System, in the District of Corruption. And this report has a headline that says, Report, milk could skyrocket to $8 a gallon if the Farm Bill is not passed. Well, what most Americans don't recognize, and they're counting on this, is that the percentage of the Farm Bill that is related to the cost of milk, and milk is subsidized, for those of you who don't know that, and it is the truth, milk is bought at, is subsidized down to a rate of around $3 or $4 a gallon, which is why that's what you pay for it. And if they were to remove that, milk would skyrocket. That would be the truth. But the point of this is not to talk about the cost of $8 a gallon milk if the Farm Bill isn't passed. In other words, listen to the misleading way that had milk could skyrocket to $8 a gallon if Farm Bill is not passed. But they neglect to tell you about the $765 billion, that's $76 billion a year, for food stamps. Tied into the bill. Now, tell me what EBT and food bill have to do with each other. Farm bill. I mean, I get it. All food comes from a farm. I'm not breaking that connection. But I'm pointing out the obvious asininity of the idea that the EBT and food stamp program should be tied up underneath the Farm Bill under the USDA. It's a bloated system where we recognize that first of all, it's grown by 50% in the last couple of years alone. We now have more people on food stamps and government subsidies than actually work. So the ticks now outweigh the dog. And what we really have at this point is the way that they write this is important. And this is an exercise in critical thinking. The fight over renewing the nation's farm bill is centered on cuts to the $80 billion a year food stamp program. But there could be unintended consequences if no agreement is reached. Higher milk prices. So let's understand what that statement said. The renewal of the farm bill is centered on this $80 billion a year food stamp program. And the unintended consequences would be that if it's not passed, milk prices will go up. So it's right off the bat, they throw fear at you. Members of the House and Senate are scheduled to begin long-awaited negotiations on the 5-year, roughly $500 billion bill this week. It's not $500 billion, it's $955 billion. If they don't finish it, so now they've dangled the carrot. Now they're going to take the carrot away and hand you the poison, right? If they don't finish it, dairy supports could expire at the end of the year and send the price of a gallon of milk skyward. KLTV reports the price of milk could reach $8 a gallon. That number's not been out. Anyway. Quote, "We are pretty much at the mercy of the people that are going to pay us. We have no control over the milk price," says a dairy farm manager. There could be political ramifications also. The House and Senate are far apart on the sensitive issue of how much money to cut from food stamps, and lawmakers are hoping to resolve that debate before election year politics set in. That ought to tell you something right there. Before election year politics set in. So basically, we can do whatever we want to you, except for an election year, when you're paying attention. I mean, unbelievable. The Farm Bill, which sets policy for farm subsidies, the food stamps, and other rural development projects. Oh, there's the rub. And other rural development projects. How about listing them? How about saying, if you're going to pass a bill, each aspect of that bill has to pass on its own merit? How about the Congress doing its job? How about voting on every aspect, on an up or down, yes or no vote, on every element of the bill? Why must we combine food stamps with farm subsidies with God only knows how much pork is thrown in there? The truth is, the reason they don't do that is because they know that if Americans ever saw some of these bills, and that Congress actually had to vote on a $5 million subsidy for some study on why bees' wings are transparent, the nation would be up in arms. So they throw them all together under comprehensive. They used to use the word omnibus. Now they use the word comprehensive. Because omnibus, people caught on to what omnibus meant. If you remember, in the 80s and the 70s and in the 80s and 90s, they used to use the term omnibus. It's an omnibus budget package. And what that means was they threw all of this crap into one kit and caboodle bag, and then they passed it. And nobody could argue with any individual amendment within it. I mean, you couldn't argue about, the bridge to nowhere or some other ridiculous spending thing. The pork. Now, they don't call it that anymore because once the public caught on to the word omnibus, it became like a curse word. Now they use the word comprehensive. So it means the same thing. And every time the word comprehensive comes out, whether it's relating to immigration, which we're going to tackle we're going to continue to tackle, or whether it's related to the Farm Bill, or whether it's related to health care, the comprehensive health care overhaul. Really? Look what we got out of it. Oh, vomit care. So anytime you hear the word comprehensive, know that you are being played. Know that their goal is to pass things in there that you would not normally accept. They're trying to couch this as a Republican versus Democrat thing. And the way that this article reads is they really mislead this. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat who was one of the negotiators on the bill, says the legislation could be a rare opportunity for the two chambers to show they can get along. Let me tell you something. The Congress gets along every day. They may acrimoniously berate each other on the floor, but trust me, folks, at the end of the day, they're all sitting around having a good time at our expense. Literally and figuratively. In the middle of the chaos, last month comes opportunity, says Klobuchar. This will really be a test of the House of whether they are willing to work with us. Really? Well, let me tell you something, Ms. Klobuchar. The House's responsibility is to control the spending, the profligate spending of the federal government and the states, of which the Senate is a part. And what you're saying there is basically you've got a gun to the head of the House and saying, see, for the past sin that you did last month of the the shutdown and the debt limitation and all that nonsense, now you're on probation. With all due respect, every one of you ought to be on probation. In fact, every one of you ought to be transitioned into a jail cell for treason. Because the parties don't stand for anything other than party affiliation. They couldn't care less about the public. They don't care about farmers. They don't care about the poor. We're all just pawns to be used, and we're food. We're food for the giants. We're food for the elite. We're food for Congress and the judiciary and the Senate and the House and the administration and the executive. We're food. Ladies and gentlemen, recognize what you are. You are a human resource. So when we talk about Farm Bill and the concept of the fruit of the tree of treason, there's a lot of alliance between these ideas. The Farm Bill is a fruit of the tree of treason. First of all, just the idea that there is a farm bill where we subsidize farmers not to grow crops is insane. It's a distortion of the principles of free market. It is restraint of trade. It is everything that the government should not be involved with. The truth is, at $8 a gallon in milk, what you'd have is a resurgence in the dairy industry, and then more farmers would get into the dairy industry, and the price would come back down. But artificially manipulating the price of milk or wheat or corn or anything else, all of it GMO tainted, by the way, is just an absurdity. You know, we've all heard the term water seeks its own level, right? So I want you to just think for a moment and take this analogy into mind. In a free market, the water on the surface of the pond is uniform. It's balanced. It seeks its own level. It's not higher in one section than in another. Now, the ground underneath it may be different. The bottom of the pond may be different heights, but the surface of the water is uniform. But if you were to sit there and take boxes and compartmentalize them and push them all the way down to the bottom, and you were to sit there and fill that entire pond with boxes of the same uniform 2x2 size. But then you began to ladle the water out of one compartment and into another. And it wouldn't take very long before the entire surface of the pond would be multiple different layers all over the place. And that's what we have. We have an economy which doesn't operate on the free market and free enterprise principles. People say capitalism has failed. Capitalism hasn't failed. We've never actually practiced capitalism in this nation. Capitalism is free enterprise, and we have never seen true free enterprise. We've seen monopolies, which are government-caused and created, because you cannot have a monopoly without government intervention. Only government can give an industry or a particular company the ability to be a monopolistic or organization or industry. Only government can do that by mandating rules and regulations that bar and prohibit competition. The simple point and the simple analogy for that is you can look right into your local township and see it. You've only got one telephone provider. You've only got one natural gas provider. You've only got one provider for many of the services that you live with every day. Why is that? Well, because the cable company is given a license by the FCC to be the only licensee. And what's the other delivery mechanism that the free market has tried to find to get around that? It's called satellite television. Well, we can't have everybody laying wire. Why can't we? Why can't we? The truth of the matter is, the free market would balance that out. Whoever is willing to lay the wire at the least price and then charge everybody else to run across that wire, that would be the winner. The same thing with the telephone company. The same thing with the gas company. The same thing when the city owns the water. You're barred from building a well on your own property because you have to bar city water. It's like the concept of Obamacare. Well, if we put in city water, but we don't make everybody cap their well, then nobody's forced to buy the water. And why would somebody buy water when they can get it out of their own well for free? I rest my case. So the city comes in and says, we own the water supply, and I don't care if you have a well or not. You've got to cap that well off, and you have to tap into city water by this date. Now, in urban areas, I get it. You can't have a guy who's got a 10-story building sitting on a postage stamp of property, and he doesn't have anything left except the concrete sidewalk in front of it of land in which to drill a well. I understand that. But I don't understand the concept of doing that in rural communities, other than as a control mechanism. These are all fruits of the tree of tyranny. The truth of the matter is, what we really need to do is defeat the Farm Bill and then say, until you break the Farm Bill down into its own individualized components and break the monopoly, the government monopoly, and allow free enterprise to work, you can't pass it. Get food stamps out of it. Make food stamps something that stands on its own, not under the USDA and not under some comprehensive bill. Let the American people be the deciding factor. That is the rule of law under the Constitution. We the people, the consent of the governed. Or have we forgotten that? The Farm Bill people are pushing very hard to get this through. And the states that are recipients of the Farm Bill, and by the way, that whole program is fraught with fraud and abuse. Farmers who don't grow anything get money. And many people get farm subsidies that are just, they're Hollywood elitists, and they're examples. The system is fraught with examples of people who don't grow anything, or they grow some token crop and they get millions of dollars in kickbacks. The problem with this Farm Bill is that it's just indicative of what is going on with every other bill that passes. It's just time for Americans to say, we've got to stop the treason, the betrayal. We must end it. And we've got to start somewhere, ladies and gentlemen. We didn't stop on Obamacare, and look at what we've got for that. I mean, Obamacare isn't a cherry. Obamacare is a cantaloupe of poison. It's a huge fruit of the tree of treason. And look what it's doing to our nation. And it hasn't even really begun. The CEO of the food bank, the largest food bank in America, came out the other day and said that the planned cut that will occur in food stamp benefits that's set to take part tomorrow, November 1st, I'm sorry, not tomorrow, but November 1st, may spark riots. Margaret Purvis, she's the president and the CEO of the Food Bank of New York City, and she was interviewed recently in Salon.com, in which she said that the expiration of these stimulus funds that have artificially propped up the SNAP program that's been reduced by $5 billion. And it's going to have an immediate impact and represent an opportunity for civil unrest to grow here. Here's what she says. If you look across the world, riots always begin typically the same way, when people cannot afford to eat. They're anticipating that the cuts in the EBT program and the food stamp program and SNAP will result in the equivalent of about a whole week's worth of food every month. So SNAP and food stamp cuts are going to equate to, 25% of the total check that or EBT card allowance that's given out, right? And they're anticipating, in fact, when the EBT system went down a couple weeks ago, there were food riots in a bunch of Walmart stores where people were going in there and walking out with 8 shopping carts worth of food. 8. That's not an exaggeration. 8 shopping carts worth of food because their card couldn't be processed because the system was down. I got to tell you, I think that was a market test to see what would happen. They could tell us it was a glitch, but we know what their definition of glitch is in this administration. So, Homeland Security, Neil Cavuto, covered this the other day, and so did InfoWars. The Department of Homeland Security has spent $80 million hiring armed guards to protect government buildings in upstate New York. They're anticipating civil unrest as a result of this food stamp issue. And my thinking is that they're going to use this as an operation to essentially show some riots and say, see, this is what happens if you don't pass. If you're not going to pass the Farm Bill, we can expect this even bigger. It is the principle of a Hegelian dialectic. Create a problem, allow that problem to foster a feeling of insecurity in the population. They then turn around to their legislators and say, where are you? Aren't you going to protect us? And they step in and say, here we come to save the day. And they ride in on their green-laden steed, green with bills, and they hand you a solution that invariably comes with your loss of liberty and your loss of economics. Every single time. It is fruit of the tree of treason. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. When we return, we're going to tackle this alternative to Obamacare. This is an important segment. If you are interested, now this is not an insurance plan, but these are Christian organizations that allow you to participate, to buy in a collective, a medical collective, if you will. It's an alternative to Obamacare, and it does exempt you from having to participate in Obamacare. So if you need to opt out for conscientious reasons, but still need medical care, here's an opportunity for you. Stick with this segment. You're going to want to hear it. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. You can find us live on the web at americasvoicenow.org. We'll be right back.